This all occurred 5 years ago. I had a friend in high school who I'll refer to as D, and D and I were very good friends for a long time. I was having home issues at the time and had developed some anxiety due to it. So I was at his house as much as I could be, as a place of comfort. I never experienced any weird stuff for at least a few months into knowing him, but as time progressed, that all changed, and things got worse and worse. I refuse to go over to his house now, and our friendship has drifted due to this. Keep this in mind. I don't believe there was a ghost in his house. I believe there was something far more dark and sinister, so I want to elaborate on why I think that something of that nature would be attracted to Dee's house, and why it would try to harm me. A bit of background about Dee and his family that I personally think attributed to whatever haunted his house, or rather, haunted me. They were slobs. I mean, their house was filthy and disgusting. The more I got to know Dee and his family, the more I realised how negative they all were, especially Dee, who I was best friends with at this time. His dad was an addict, and so was Dee. An addict to weed, alcohol, food, smoking, anything, it didn't matter. They lacked any semblance of self-control. This, I believe, was the main cause. I got Dee into PC gaming, and let's say that he isn't too clever with his browsing history. And I accidentally stumbled onto some particular tastes he has. Very odd specific tastes. I won't disclose what it was, but know that it was definitely something that would attract evil. I'm no prude, so trust me when I say I doubt this taste is anything you've ever looked up late at night. I started to realise over the months that we were spending together every day, almost all day, that Dee was a dark person, full of jealousy, hatred, selfishness, and objectively speaking, a dumb person. I found a lot of disturbing things in his room and in the closets in the house. I kept everything to myself, and he ended up telling me about his problems with his taste years later, and we both experienced a paranormal event that night. That's a long and different story entirely. I think it's important to note that I was raised Christian, hold Christian beliefs, but I'm generally a bad Christian, and have struggled with my faith and following what I believe. This hypocritical conviction, I believe, played a significant role in my haunting. His family attended a cultish church that partakes in holy laughter and speaking in tongues, something I was raised to believe was false and wrong. Whatever was haunting the house only haunted me, and still to this day, Dee and his family either think I made everything up or just don't care. I don't know which is true. I'll begin with the first experience. This must have been around 6 months into being there every day, but it might have been sooner. I started keeping my gaming PC at Dee's house after knowing each other for a few months. This came after some other stuff at home happened, and when Dee wasn't home, I would hang out there alone and chill after school. I basically lived there. I kept all my stuff in the small guest bedroom, which shared a wall with Dee's room. The first experience I had was playing CSGO and hearing what sounded like footsteps directly above my head. To give context to people who don't know what CSGO is, it's a competitive game that requires a lot of focus. So even though I could hear these sounds above my head, I just ignored them. It was the first time I would hear these footsteps. Footsteps that would become all too familiar. The footsteps sounded like pirate boots on a boat that you'd hear in Pirates of the Caribbean. Dramatic, large thuds with each step. The sound persisted for at least 10 minutes off and on, before abruptly stopping, which was immediately followed by the closet door being hit from the inside. Hard. Imagine a small child were to run into a door. The desk my monitor was set on shook, and I was just baffled and stuck in my chair from pure fear. I stared at the sliding door waiting for it to open, but it became quiet instead. No footsteps. It scared me to the point where I just sprinted out of the room and to the front of his house, where I stayed till Dee got home. I told him what happened, and he didn't think much of it. We went into the room, and he slid open the door. Nothing. I searched the whole closet. No holes that rats could have come out of. only a few empty cardboard boxes. From this point on, it became the norm for me to hear footsteps directly above my head, but only whenever I was there alone. The footsteps would follow me throughout the house, and occasionally I would stop, and they would stop right above my head. And if I stayed still long, they would stop. I can't emphasize enough how much they matched my movement, and this may sound odd, but they reacted to my thoughts. I would think to myself, okay, I'm going to move in 3, 2, 1. Then before I actually moved, the footsteps would stomp around and walk in circles. It was horrifying, and I seriously couldn't explain it to myself. This was disturbing to me, but I really didn't have anywhere else to go, so I just ignored it and chalked it up to rats or something. This phenomenon would happen every few days when I was alone in the house, and each time it made me so scared and made me feel so alone. Fast forward a year maybe. I'm lying in bed, it's Saturday morning, and I'm there in the house alone in the guest room. Dee's at work, his parents aren't home. It's 11 a.m., and I'm scrolling mindlessly on my phone. Breaking the dead silence instantly, I hear footsteps in the attic, but this time running from across the house very aggressively to exactly over my head. I remember it vividly. The running stopped right over my head, and I just laid there in fear and silence. The footsteps seemed like they were angry, and for the first time, I felt a presence. It's hard to explain, but imagine your eyes are closed and someone gets very close to your face. Even though you can't see or hear them, you can sense them. That's how it began to feel with this thing. I would sense it before I heard it. I became very acute to its presence over the years. It was a good 2 minutes before I went to get out of the bed, and then, exactly as I had mentioned with the footsteps to the thought of myself moving, a loud crash directly above me, right where I was looking, straight into the ceiling from the attic. It was as if you were deadlifting 150 pounds and then threw it on the ground as hard as you could. I immediately sprinted out of the house, except this time I walked home, because I knew it would be hours before anyone was home. This is where I started dreading sleeping at his house. Was it in his attic? I became obsessed with that question. I told Dee this, and he nonchalantly wrote it off as an animal. But as much as I explained it to him that it reacted to my thoughts, he just didn't think much of it. A few days after this, we were in his garage, where there's an entryway into his attic. I convinced him to get a ladder and see what we could find there. I went up first and shined a light deep into the darkness of the room. I couldn't see anything, and no amount of money on earth would compel me to enter this room. Something about it was just wrong. I saw, however, a box. A black box. It was in the back right corner of the attic, right above the guest room. I think this box was what was dropped over my head a few days previous. I had Dee look, and he saw it as well. In hindsight, I wish he'd gone in and looked at what was in the box. At this point, I want to clarify that I'm completely stable and have no history of schizophrenia or insanity in my family. I'm an extremely rational person, and up until this point had no interests in belief or spirits or ghosts or demons. I want to preface this because things get a little crazy after this. Dee had a dog, who I'll refer to as P. P and I were best friends. He was truly an extraordinary dog. I loved him with all my heart, and he comforted me in my lowest moments, since life was hard then, and I never really opened up to anyone. When I experienced all these things happening to me, P was there with me. So when I say alone, I really wasn't. In fact, I think if P wasn't there, I wouldn't have been able to endure it. He was with me every single time I'd walk to get water or go to the bathroom, make food. And the loud, horrifying footsteps would come back instantly over my head. It was basically a jump scare that could come randomly, and it made me very paranoid and hesitant to move around the house. It was an abusive being that enjoyed haunting me and toying with me. Dee and his family left for a week to go on vacation, and asked me to take care of P. At this point in time, I had 2 computers. I kept one at Dee's house and one at my own, and things had subsided a bit at my house, so I didn't spend every night at Dee's house anymore. I went over to Dee's house every day and played with P and fed him. I would hang out there for a few hours and head home. 3 days after Dee's family left, I walked into their house and P was freaking out, barking at something in the middle of the living room. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't. He just snarled and barked as if something was in the middle of the living room. Finally, after what seemed like 5 or 10 minutes, he relaxed a bit and, still on guard, followed me to his food bowl, and then into the guest room where I played some games. No footsteps or presence that I was now very sensitive to be felt or heard. A rarity. I leave, and the next day I come over to the same thing. P is freaking out way more this time, more aggressively. He's moving around the living room, but his gaze and posture is poised around the center of the living room as he moves around it. I felt the presence this time, and as I watched P bark and whimper and freak out, I try and listen. I listened for at least 5 minutes. I swear I didn't move a single muscle. P calmed down and looked at me, as if he knew I was just standing there listening. Finally, I think, alright, well, I don't hear anything. Maybe P is just upset D and his family are gone. This is the first time they left since I had known them, and they spend a lot of time in the living room together. As I barely moved a centimeter, boom, 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 right above my head. I jumped at least 5 feet into the air, stomping, jumping, and clawing on the floor above my head. P starts to freak out and starts to almost attack the air in the middle of the living room. I'm thoroughly freaked out, so I just run over to P's food bowl, pour in a lot of food, and run out of the house. It was around this time that I realized I really just do not ever want to be in his house again, alone or not. The next 2 or 3 days I go over there, P is still freaked out, but no barking or anything related to the living room. I quickly fed him and left. On the last day before D and his family came home, something happened. I enter the door and immediately feel the presence. It's almost as if the air itself gets humid and thick. I'm on guard and P is crying this time. He's literally crying, jumping on me and whimpering as I enter the door. I take 1 step into the door, a loud footstep right above me. The first step I take into the house. I'd gotten almost annoyed with this thing at this point. I didn't bother to stop and listen. I just headed straight to P's bowl. I walk over to the side room where it's kept. It's missing. The food bag, which is heavy and zipped, is still sitting there, but the bowl is missing. I look around, and as I walk around the house, I hear the footsteps following me in the attic above my head. P is whimpering, and every few seconds barking. I walked out to the living room, and what I saw next, literally, has changed my life ever since. P's food bowl is sitting directly in the middle of the living room, right where P had been barking and attacking the air a few days prior. It was completely full of food. In fact, it was overflowing with food, as if it was a message, I knew why you were coming here. I remember walking backwards slowly out of the house, stunned. I couldn't believe my eyes. I shut the door and got into my car. I drove over with my girlfriend and it was late. She knew about Dee's house and the things I'd experienced there. She said I was as white as a ghost and apparently had tears running down my face. Before I even said a word, I had the car pulling out the driveway. She frantically was asking what happened. It was at this moment that I decided I would never go to his house alone, ever again. Dee and his family came back and I told them what happened. His mum looked at me like I was a joke, and she half listened to me and half listened to the TV show she was watching. I told his dad that maybe a homeless person was living in their attic and that he has to look in there. He finally accepted, and he, Dee, and I walked into the garage with the ladder, and his dad peered into the attic with a flashlight. He said there's nothing in there, and I said, look in the back right corner, there's a black box there. No, there's not. Dee and I looked at each other. For the first time, I think Dee finally was scared because he saw the black box himself. Dee and I told his dad about the box. I told him that it was thrown at the ceiling floor when I was in the house alone. He didn't care. He just simply shut the attic door, climbed down the stairs, and put the ladder back. I told Dee that I was done sleeping at his house, and I was done staying there at all, period. I told him if he wanted to come over to my house, then that's fine. But I wasn't going to take my computer home, and that was that. He was super pissed, but I told him that over the years he never took me seriously, and I was done. It simply was just too scary to be there, and after spending so much time there and enduring a lot of hardship in my own personal life, I associated the horror of that house with the anxieties and worries of my own life. Leaving the house for good was a life-changing decision for me. I don't know why those things happened to me, but in a weird way, it made me a stronger person because I had to decide I was done and I didn't care how I made Dee feel. My whole life, I never cared about myself first, and that was the first time I did. I have been back over this since. I vowed to never go again, and in the short times I go over, I still feel a presence there. But Dee was a good friend, and he struggles with a lot of his own demons, so when he begs me to come over a few hours, I do. I learned things about Dee after all this went down that made a lot of the evil in the house make much more sense. Dee is a disturbed and confused person, and his family has a history of disturbing and sinister events. Whatever is in his house was forever changed my life and my views on things that are unexplainable. I was home alone with my older brother and sister. My parents weren't home. I can't remember where they went, but it's not important. My sister was in her bedroom, and my brother was on his computer a couple of rooms away. I was in the living room by myself. We have a lot of dogs, but for some reason, only one of them was outside. I don't remember what led to me going outside to let her in, but I think it was about to start raining or something. Our garage leads to our backyard, so I go into the garage and out to the yard, so I'm standing in the doorway. I don't see my dog anywhere. I step a little further out the doorway and look for her. Her name is Chloe. We have this big concrete block outside the garage doorway, acting as a sort of step, as our garage is slightly elevated. I step out of the doorway, now standing on the concrete, and call out her name. Chloe. I don't see her. This was very unusual for her, as she's a sweet and energetic dog, and always comes running when she sees you. She would always come when called. I call her name again, but I still don't see or hear her. I'm slightly confused at this point, but then I hear clapping, like clapping you do when you're calling a dog. I stiffen slightly. It sounds like it's coming from the side of the house. After it stops, I slowly step off the concrete block, onto the grass, and look at the side of the house where I had heard of the clapping. There was no one there. None of our neighbours were even outside. I was really scared at this point. The clapping was so clear, there was no way I could have imagined it. I take a step back, closer to the concrete, ready to make a run for it. I called out for my dog one more time, not wanting to leave her out there. Chloe. A couple of seconds later, the clapping starts up again. I'm terrified at this point. I don't have any clue what that is. Then I hear a man's voice, very clearly saying my dog's name. Chloe. It sounded like it was coming from the field by my yard. I didn't recognize the voice. I had heard each of my neighbours speak before, and that was definitely not any of them. It sounded close by, but far enough away that I knew I wasn't in any immediate danger. The voice sounded almost mocking, like it was making fun of me. It was as if the voice was amused by my obvious fear. Only a few seconds later, after I hear the voice, Chloe comes running up to me from the other side of the yard. I would have been able to see her. I grab her and run inside and lock the door behind me. I sit on the couch in the living room, scared out of my mind. My sister is still in her room, and my brother is still on his computer. I was alone in the room, except a few dogs, and trying to make sense of what just happened. After a while, my parents get home and I tell my family what happened. No one believed me. The only person who even remotely believed me was my mom, clearly seeing how distressed I was about the whole thing. If I had to guess, I would say it was a skinwalker, but all I know for sure was that it was scary. When I was 13 or 14, I met a friend who can sense things. I started experiencing things myself and have never had an explanation. This was about 18 years ago, more or less, so I no longer remember specifics, but I hope whatever details I can give will help. It all started when we started hanging out and then stopped when I moved to a new school. We were friends for 2 years and we went to a Catholic school here in the Philippines. I would dream about numbers. They were all on fire, and it's like a dark void and nothing else but those numbers. I would try calling them on the phone, but nothing happens. I also never saw them come out as lottery results. I don't remember how many numbers there are, but it's usually 7 numbers to reach someone, so I guess about 7 to 10 numbers. I would also dream about this woman in red being chased and attacked in her unit. She lived high up. It would always end with her trying to escape through the balcony, and I would see the city lights outside. Sometimes I'm seeing her as her attacker. Sometimes I'm in one corner of the room as a third person. I was on the phone with a friend, and I suddenly had some sort of a vision where I could see her home. I described everything in perfect detail: what lights were on, what the wall colours were, where the plants were displayed, where she sat, and where she was going. I was on the phone again with another friend, and he was telling me about the day before, and for some reason, I totally forgot that we never met. But I could remember passing him and told him what he was wearing down to his shoes and where he was walking along. I would feel things around me. One time, I was dreaming that a woman was at the foot of my bed, slowly pulling my blanket. I woke up and saw the blanket slide and fall to the floor in this exact same direction and area she was pulling it from in my dream. I once woke up frozen with my hands on my chest, and it felt so heavy, like something was pushing my body down, and could hear ticking sounds that were the same as that thing that used to lower down caskets. I fell asleep after the struggle and woke up really tired. I dreamt that a young boy was bending over me from behind me. I was in bed facing the other way. He was behind me, and he was bent so that his face was above me where I was facing. That's as far as I can remember for now. It is worth noting that after we went separate ways, things stopped, except for when I start feeling that something bad is going to happen, and I become physically affected, and it actually does happen. My brother and I were laying in my bed watching TV one night, about 4 to 5 years ago, around anywhere from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. We were just chilling, lights was on, all nothing scary. Then something coming down from my closet area screamed super loud. It was real quick, like a real loud 1 or 2 second and pretty high pitched. Me and my brother jumped under the covers so fast and stayed there all night until we fell asleep. Next day, we woke up and told my family, but nobody believed us. They just said we probably stayed up late and were just hearing things. I mean, I can understand if only one person, like just me, heard it and reacted, but it was me and my brother, so I'm sure there was something. Also, to throw out there, my friends and sisters would come over, and I told them about this story after we moved out. And they all said that they got weird vibes from the house too. That house is where I had my worst nightmare when I was younger. I'm not going to get into all that right now, because that's a story for another time. Also, some old lady lived there before us, so I don't know if she died there and maybe had something to do with it. But it was definitely freaky, and I'd always feel weird at that house when it was night. Even in the day when I'd be home alone, it was weird. My whole family lives in North Carolina now, but this happened about 8 years ago when we were living in Florida. two-story house whose history of prior owners was unknown to him. He gets off work around 3 p.m. That's when he normally starts doing things around the house, little projects here and there that my grandma gives him. However, this specific week, he was just finishing up recovering from back surgery. Something about bone splinters at the bottom of his spine. Point is, he finally was able to start doing things around the house again. Carefully, of course. On this day, his project was to repaint his office room upstairs, which consisted of removing the wallpaper first. He didn't really pay any mind to where the nanny was. He was just kind of doing his own thing. He knew what he had to do. A few minutes into him sitting on the floor removing the wallpaper, he heard a woman's voice behind him say, "Oh no," in a concerned voice. Not yelling, but not calm either. He remembered it not exactly sounding like Grandma, but discarded it because who else could it be? He turned around mid-sentence and said, "What? You knew I was going to do this," and then stopped when he didn't see anyone there. He stuck his head out the door to the hallway, asking where she went. No response. He walked over to the edge of the stairs to yell down for her, and that's when it happened. He physically felt two hands push his back, making him fall down the entire flight of stairs. After laying there in excruciating pain, he managed to stumble his way out back because it's the only other place where Grandma would be. If she was in the house, she would have heard him. She was outside tanning in a lawn chair by the pool, reading the paper with a glass of tea. My grandpa believed in the paranormal world after that. He was unmistaken, and I know he wouldn't lie. He's not a liar, and there would have been no reason to lie about that. He lived there for about another year before moving up here, and never experienced anything in that time. I'm not really sure if he ever finished painting the room. What kind of ghost harms someone for tearing up some wallpaper? This happened when I was around 3, so I myself do not remember it. My mom had just picked me up from kindergarten and left me in my room while she went to the kitchen to unload my bag and whatnot. She then came into my room maybe 10 to 20 minutes later, and I said, "Bye, see you again soon," as I waved towards the window. Obviously, my mom's first thought was that I either saw a little bird outside, or I simply had an imaginary friend. So she asked who I was talking to which I replied, "My friend, Antonio." My mom doesn't remember the exact name, but says it was a relatively common name. Then she said I stood there staring outside for maybe 5 seconds before I nonchalantly said, "His dad beat him to death." She was very spooked by this comment, especially coming from a 3-year-old, so she asked me to describe what he was wearing. And according to her, I described a boy dressed in typical early 1900s clothing, and asked if he was dirty, and I said no. Apparently she heard me talk to the boy a few more times, but as the months went by, it happened less and less. She asked around her friends and even our pediatrician, and they say kids say disturbing things sometimes, and that she shouldn't worry about it too much, unless it became a more frequent thing. She said she never did further research on the house. She didn't want to ask questions she didn't want to find the answer to. I'm 37, and this happened when I was about 11. I lived in a small brick house with my mum and younger brother. There were 2 bedrooms at one end of the house, which were mine and my brother's, with my mum's room being on the opposite end of the house. In my bedroom, I had a bunk bed and I always slept on the top bunk. I had a ceiling fan and light fixture, which had the metal pull cords, and I had tied a string from the one that turns the light on and off, and attached that string to the top bunk so I could turn my light off once I'd climbed up to go to bed. So one night, I'd stayed up later than I was supposed to, because I had called in a song request to a radio station and been waiting for them to play the song so I could record it on a cassette tape. They had finally played it, and I successfully recorded it, so I climbed into bed, got comfortable, and then grabbed my string and pulled, turning off the light. About 5 seconds after turning it off, My room was filled with a blue light. I opened my eyes and scanned the room, and when I saw the light was coming from, my blood went cold. There was a Native American man in full Native American clothing, standing in the center of my room with his arms crossed, with a bright blue aura, I guess you could say, emitting from him, and he was just staring at me. I tried to scream, but couldn't seem to move for what felt like an eternity. I finally was able to scream, and once I did, I was able to grab my strength and turn the light back on, and he vanished. I told him it was a bad dream, because she's definitely a non-believer in anything paranormal. I slept with the light on that night. The next day, my younger brother asked about what had happened, and I told him what I had seen. He proceeded to tell me he'd seen the exact same thing about a week before my experience, but he told me not to be scared. He said he believed the man was protecting us. Well, I'm 37 now, and had almost forgotten the incident, until just now. I was listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories podcast, episode 12, and there was a story by an anonymous listener from San Diego who'd seen the exact same man, only he was holding a hatchet. I'm in Tennessee, the opposite side of the country from the anonymous listener. As soon as I heard his story, I began shaking and crying. Now I'm curious. Has anyone else seen him? I was sleeping on the couch in my game room because we had a boy staying with us for a while. So I gave up my room for him and I went to sleep in my sister's room because she was off at college. When my sister comes to visit, I sleep on the couch. I've always struggled sleeping because of nightmares, and on top of that, I've just always had a hard time falling asleep. And if I ever woke up in the middle of the night, I would never be able to fall asleep. So I was able to fall asleep pretty fast that night. I woke up just at 3 in the morning. I couldn't move my body. I couldn't even open my eyes. It freaked me out at first, but then it was just peaceful. It was almost like my senses were amplified. I was fully aware of everything. Then all of a sudden, I felt something come into my room. I don't know how to describe it. All I knew was that it was going to harm me. I felt it move from across the room to the couch where I was sleeping. Then I felt its cold hand squeezing my throat, and another cold hand covering my nose and mouth. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My head was throbbing. I thought I was going to die. And then I heard a familiar voice, but I couldn't tell where I knew that voice from. I was sweet and gentle, but also urgent. It was a female voice. She said, "You have to move now, Emily." I said through my mind, "I can't." She responded with, "You have to try. Move, now." I summoned all my strength to punch whatever was choking me and shot my arm and whatever was by me. I was able to move by then and quickly shot up, wide awake, gasping for breath, but ready to kick some butt. What I saw I can only describe as a shadow or smoke man. I said to him, "Fuck off." Then he laughed and disappeared into a wall. I sat down on the couch and just stared at where he was while rubbing my sore neck and catching my breath. I just stared at the wall for a good 15 minutes. Then I silently thanked the woman who helped me. There was a little bruising around my neck, a few scratches and some redness. That's how I know I didn't imagine all this. The next night, the same thing happened. I couldn't move and everything was peaceful, and I heard the woman say, "Are you feeling better?" That's when I realized the voice was from my grandma, who had died just 3 or 4 days before this. I said through my mind, "Grandma?" She replied with, "Yes, it's me, baby girl." Then I felt the man again, and I felt sick to my stomach. "Do you feel his presence, Emily?" she said. I replied with a yes. And instantly, I couldn't breathe. I didn't feel his hand on me like last time. I just couldn't breathe. My grandma told me that I'm the protector of this house, that if he kills me, it puts everyone in this house in danger. She said, "You have to fight back. Try to move. Move, Emily." So I did the exact same thing as last time. I snapped up and was able to breathe. I looked at the smoky man and told him he was not welcome here and he dissolved in front of my eyes. My sister had woken up and heard me gasping for breath, and came out of her room and saw the smoky man and saw me tell him he wasn't welcome here. I had no idea she was there until the morning when she asked me about it, so I told her everything. She confessed to me that she woke up because she heard Grandma's voice telling her to check on me. We decided to keep this between us, and I have no idea what my grandma means about me being the protector of our house. And if I'm being honest, I don't want anything to do with that. I live on the small Pacific island nation of Kiribati for about a year, last year. I'm American and was called there to work as a missionary for my church. The island has Polynesian culture, but not much history. There isn't much known of how the people originally came to the island and where they came from. There's a lot of dark magic and voodoo tales. Specific islands are notorious for certain things, like pretty girls, dark magic, giants and such. On the more remote outer islands, dark magic is very prevalent. The main island is very crowded and way more advanced than the outer islands. But many other missionaries would give experiences they hadn't heard with dark spirits or black magic. The people are very superstitious and love magic tricks. A tradition they have is that their loved ones who die will reincarnate as rats. We're required not to kill or harm rats because if we do, we'll be cursed and rats will continue to come and haunt us and basically bite our stuff. I've had first-hand experience with this. I've seen people invite and feed rats in their houses, and none of their things are meddled with. But once the American missionaries started killing rats and mice we saw in our house, the rats conspired against us, and we had lots of bad luck. The people also heavily believe in ghosts and spirits and demons. The first town I was a missionary was Bikini Bayo. There was a family we were teaching in the lower side of the town, and it would take a good 10 minutes to bike down there. Our days were sort of busy, and so it was hard to find a time to visit this specific family. All of the other families we were visiting were in the upper side of town. We were only able to visit this family at night, around 8:30 or 9. On one occasion, we came down to teach this family. There was a lot of commotion at the neighbour's house. The Kiribati people loved to throw parties. As we approached the father of the family we were teaching, we asked him what was going on next door. He said it was a funeral. The family next door went through a terrible experience. The daughter of the Korakora family passed away at the age of 7. She was having seizures and was brought to the only hospital by her parents. The doctors were able to get her under control, and the family stayed there at the hospital with their daughter. That night, the guards were standing march by the wall of the hospital and spotted a small girl walking up to the gate. The girl had dark hair covering her face, and she was only wearing underwear. The guards called out to the girl who was approaching the gate, but the girl didn't answer. They asked where she was going. All the girl did was raise her hand up and point toward the lagoon side of the island, across the street. The guards were so afraid, thinking she was a ghost, that they let her pass. The following morning, the parents woke up and were very concerned because their daughter was missing. Police got involved, and information about what happened came from the guards. A few hours later, the body was found face down in the lagoon. She had drowned and her face was bloated. The girl had walked half a mile out in the low-tide lagoon to drown herself. The parents mourned and were so afraid. They said the exact same thing happened to the girl's grandmother. The grandmother had had seizures and went and drowned herself in the lagoon. The creepy part being that the daughter of the Korakora family had the exact same name as the grandmother. When I was around 12 years old, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house just up the street from our previous home. The house wasn't very big, and the floor plans for our part of the house were completely different from our neighbours. Our neighbours were a lovely little family of 4. Husband is from England, and my wife is from Norway, which is where I live. They also had a little 3-year-old girl and a 6-month-old baby boy. Now, I love children, always have, and at the time, I really wanted to start babysitting. It's quite common to start babysitting at age 12, and I was turning 13 a month later anyway, so I wanted to find some small job. As we got to know our neighbours over the first few months of living there, my parents told the neighbours that if they needed a sitter, then it would be nice if they would consider trying me out. Seeing as it would be my first job as a babysitter, we thought it would be smart to start with my next door neighbours, seeing as my parents would literally be on the other side of the wall in case anything happened. Cut to a Friday night when my neighbours went to a party that was happening just down our street. I got there at around 8 p.m, and the parents told me they'd come home at around 2 or 3 a.m. Both kids were already sleeping, so they told me to just put on a movie and relax. Now, these kids were the easiest to babysit ever. Once you put them to bed and they fall asleep, absolutely nothing would wake them up. They are some of the heaviest sleepers I've ever seen, so babysitting them was usually pretty uneventful. I was on the couch watching Avatar in the living room on the second floor. The kids had their own separate bedroom that was just downstairs, where the front door was. I could basically see their bedrooms from where I was sitting, as the place was quite small. Because of the hallway, I couldn't see the front door. Now again, this house was very small, so as long as the TV wasn't on too loud, then I could hear everything that happened downstairs. At around midnight, I heard the front door unlock and my neighbours walked in whilst talking. I heard them close the door and that they started taking off their jackets and shoes. I thought it was a bit weird that they hadn't called to let me know that they were coming home early. I just assumed that it must have slipped their minds, so I went downstairs to greet them. I could hear them talking up until the point that I came around the corner to the hallway that led to the door. There wasn't anybody there. The talking fell silent the second I turned the corner. The only sound was from the TV upstairs. My heart started beating so fast and my head was rushing. I ran to the bedrooms and checked the kids before I searched the rest of the house. I opened every door, checked every cabinet for anything that would explain what just happened. There was nothing there. The kids were still sound asleep. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I checked the kids one last time and made sure that their doors were wide open so that I could see them from upstairs. I sat down to finish the movie whilst trying to process what had just happened, but when I sat down, I noticed the TV had been shut off even though I had left it on. When I turned it back on, there was just snow on the screen. I couldn't for the life of me get it to work again. That's when the talking downstairs started up again. Not only that, but the baby started screaming bloody murder. This baby never woke up from naps and definitely wouldn't ever scream the way it did that night. I've never in my life ran down a staircase as fast as I did that night. I rushed towards the baby's bedroom, only to find the door closed. I ripped the door open, picked up the baby, and rushed to pick up his sister. I took them both upstairs and held those kids for almost 3 hours before the parents came back home. The talking and sounds downstairs came and went, as I had the kids with me on the couch. I held them as close to me as I could and tried my best to keep them asleep. As the parents came home, I was too scared to walk downstairs to greet them. I couldn't be sure if it was actually them or not until they walked up the stairs where they found me clutching their children. Obviously, they noticed I was upset and asked me what had happened. I honestly felt like I had lost my mind at that point, but I told them the story anyway. After I was finished, they told me that it wasn't the first time that anything like that had happened before. Apparently, they heard voices all the time at night. I was kind of mortified that they didn't think to warn me before, but they said they were sorry that this happened to me, and the mom walked me home to my house. I slept with the lights on in my room for almost a month after that. Believe it or not, I did go back and I babysat those kids again. I've suffered from sleep paralysis on a regular basis since I turned a year old. Every single sleep of my life has either been an immersive or lucid dream or sleep paralysis. You might think I'm being dramatic when I say this, but I'm 100% sure that my first ever memory was actually sleep paralysis. To start, I've moved at least 20 times since I was born, and I have memories of sleep paralysis in every single bedroom I've ever had. We moved from my first house when I was around 1 year and a couple of months, so my first experience was a little bit after my first birthday. At this point, we lived in a 2 story house. I have two older brothers who shared a bedroom in the bottom story of the house, right next to my bedroom. Our parents' bedroom was just up the staircase, so that if their bedroom door was open, they could more or less see me sleeping in my crib. I was notorious for waking up in the middle of the night and screaming bloody murder at that age. According to my mom, there was absolutely nothing they could do to put me back to sleep, as long as I was still downstairs in my room. It quickly became routine for my parents then to just bring me upstairs as fast as possible whenever I started screaming, mostly to spare my poor brothers from listening to my hysterics all night. Whenever they brought me upstairs, however, I would fall asleep immediately and never wake up until my parents had to physically wake me the morning after. This was the routine up until my first ever experience. As per the routine, I started screaming my lungs out at around 1 a.m., according to my mom. She picked me up as usual and brought me upstairs to their bedroom and put me in their bed where I quickly fell silent. Again, this was the routine they were used to. Now, this is where my first ever memory starts. I remember being tucked in between my mom and dad. I distinctly remember the residual scent of my mother's perfume mixed in with the smell of her breath on my face. My dad's hand was stretched over my legs and drawing my mother closer as they tucked in around me. Eventually, I woke up, slightly confused. I didn't know why I was awake. I remember feeling very confused, and I wanted to try to explore the room, try to find out what had woken me up. No matter how hard I tried, though, I couldn't move a single muscle in my body. My eyes darted around the room, desperately trying to discover the source of my discomfort. Feeling absolutely helpless, I tried screaming out to try to wake my mom or dad so that they could help me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make a single sound. I distinctly remember the feeling of my tears running down my cheeks as I was laying there mortified over the fact that I couldn't make a single sound. That's when I saw him. Saw them. Two peculiar figures standing at the edge of the bed. Their forms were illuminated by the subtle glow of the moonlight, creeping through the curtains of the window behind them. The figure on the left was tallest. The one on the right was around half a head shorter. I couldn't really see much detail on their bodies, as their bodies looked almost as if they were out of focus. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus on any detail. Their faces, on the other hand, I wished I could delete certain details. I want to reiterate again that I was just barely a year old at this point. My reference bank of people at this point was my parents and my two older brothers. Seeing these two figures standing at the edge of the bed, I remember immediately thinking that this had to be my brothers wearing masks or something. The worst thing, though, was that even though I thought that the figures in front of me were my brothers, I was still terrified. Their faces held the most grotesque grimaces I've ever seen, and I still don't understand how I imagined them. The only way I can describe how the expressions were is imagine if a fox and a badger were taxidermied, but the taxidermist's main inspiration was the uncanny valley. I spent years believing my brothers hid these horrible animal faces and would spend those nights at the end of my parents' bed, just staring at me, just tilting their heads as they examined my small form, gasping, fighting against everything keeping me from making noise. No matter what I did, though, I could never break eye contact with them. I know my description of my first ever sleep paralysis encounter might seem a bit long and too detailed. The thing is, though, although the subject of my sleep paralysis has changed hundreds of times since then, they've always just stared at me. There's been talking, sure, but it's never been directed to me. I've had sleep paralysis where I've heard my entire family being murdered. I've heard people screaming outside my house is on fire and that everyone needs to evacuate. But no one has ever talked to me. In 22 years of sleep paralysis, almost every single month, There was always at least one figure just standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me, keeping eye contact. They've never, ever asked me a single question. They've never said anything directly to me. They've only ever stared at me. Until last night. The last few weeks have been filled with the weirdest kind of sleep paralysis I've ever experienced. I haven't experienced sleep paralysis much in the past few years. An isolated experience here and there, but nothing other than that. I used to sleep 10 to 14 hours every time I had the time to sleep in. This was especially true during weekends. As long as my blinders were up, I could sleep until physically disturbed. The past few months, however, something has changed. No matter how tired I feel, I cannot sleep longer than 6 a.m. at most. It absolutely doesn't matter how late I stay up, I still wake up at 6 a.m. on the dot. It's not that I feel I've slept enough at that point either. I'll wake up exhausted and go to sleep even more exhausted, and still wake up at 6 a.m., only to repeat the pattern. Yesterday, I went to sleep at around 10:45. I've been sick all week, and I had a lecture today that I was excited for, and I wanted to make sure I was well rested for the next day. As I've said, I'm a 22-year-old student. I live alone in the same apartment I've lived in for 2 years with my cat that I've had since I was 8 years old. I haven't heard a single sound from a neighbour in the entirety of these 2 years. I went to sleep yesterday at around 2 a.m, absolutely exhausted. My cat fell asleep in between my legs, and I can't even say that I had any dreams. That was honestly my first sign that this wasn't going to be a quiet evening for me. My cat did wake up a couple of times in the early night, poking me and trying to get my attention. After 15 years, I know exactly how it feels when she's the one to wake me up. There's absolutely no room for confusion. I woke up at around 3 a.m. last night. Immediately, I was struck by this sudden, small feeling I'd never felt before in my life. I couldn't open my eyes. No matter how fucking hard I tried. No matter how fucking hard I wanted, I couldn't fucking open my eyes. At this point, I tried my hardest to scream as loud as I thought was possible. I could feel the weight of my cat sleeping peacefully on my legs, even though I still couldn't see her. I screamed and screamed. I pushed and tore my voice apart as hard as I could to escape this horrible unholiness. My forced mutism and blindness kept me hostage as my body still laid in my bed, completely paralyzed. My only connection to reality right now was my cat. I could still hear her purring. I could hear a water fountain trickling in the background. I could still hear her making biscuits while pouring at me. The sound of it all in place of my forced silence was almost deafening as I laid there sleeping. That was until the point it all stopped. I struggled against my own body, trying to force my eyes open, to no avail. The harder I tried to force my eyes open, the harder and more painful it became. I couldn't get a single glimpse of what was happening. As it happened, though, I felt a large hand grab the lower part of my face and push it down into the dark. The hand kept a firm hand on my face, and as it kept down, I could hear this one voice reverberate almost inside my ears as they were screaming at me. Hey, hey, hey Eli, hey, how does it feel? I see you. Look at me. Tell me how it is. Hey, fucking listen to me. Tell me, look at me. Come on, I fucking dare you. Tell me how you fucking feel, huh? Tell me how you fucking feel. Hello? Hello? Hello, 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 I see you. Tell me how it fucking feels. No matter how much I kept trying to scream, I just couldn't make it stop. The voice just kept repeating the same thing, never allowing me to see anything until I begged it to stop. The screaming kept on going for about 45 minutes. It felt like before I was physically able to open my eyes and make them stop. I'm terrified to go to sleep tonight. I don't remember how long ago this was exactly. I think I was about 15 years old though. I was visiting my aunt in Belgium with my family, and I had a really nice dream that night. It was an extremely realistic dream. I don't remember it very well. The only thing I do remember is that I met a really pretty blonde girl my age on a train, and the entire dream was us getting to know each other and falling in love. It was one of those dreams that when I woke up, I thought it actually happened, and you can imagine my disappointment when I realised it was just a dream. Even when the realisation hit me, it still felt off. I'm used to having realistic dreams, but this felt very different. Later that day, we were going on a train to visit my grandparents in Germany. We hopped on the train and slept for the majority of the train ride. As we were getting off the train, I glanced down the aisle, and there I saw a girl who looked identical to the girl in my dream. She looked up and we looked at each other, and I saw her gasp noticeably when she saw me. There's no doubt in my mind it was a look of surprise, and I could tell she recognised me. My parents pulled me off the train and that was it. It's been like 4 years, but I won't ever forget that look on her face. This happened when I was a child. I was hanging out with my friends in my room. It was New Year's Eve, and my family was hosting a party. So all of the adults were celebrating outside, and us children were in my room doing something. All of a sudden, my sister tells us to look at the door. We all turned our heads and saw a very weird shadow from the crack between the door and the floor. And the doorknob was turning very slowly. This shouldn't have been too strange, but our door was locked, and our doorknob physically can't be turned when locked. The kids in the room went from being confused to scared, and without thinking about it too much, I leapt to my feet and opened the door to see what was going on. I opened the door, and there was absolutely nothing there. I searched adjacent rooms for people to see if anyone was pranking us, but I found nothing. We quickly went to the parents, and I asked them if they wanted something. They looked at me confused, and my dad said they were good. After the party, I told my parents what happened and that we should move out, since at this point I was very scared. They didn't believe me and thought I was either making it up or imagining it. I know what happened though, since not only my sister, but all of the kids who were there remember the experience vividly. This is a story that happened to me a few months ago. It's not the scariest story you'll find, but it appears to me as a really strange situation. So 3 months ago, I was living in an exchange study in a big coastal city of Greece. Near my place, there was a 3-kilometer long and straight modern seawalk, recently finished, going from the city to a really distant residential area. It was a really spaced area, with trees and a park separating the seawalk from a big avenue. Being a really spaced and quiet place, in comparison to the city centre, it was a bit chaotic. I really liked to walk there. Many people were usually chilling and walking there, like me. So today, I walked alone with my headphones for 3 kilometers, around 4 or 5 p.m. It was the end of the day. The sun was low, but it was pretty light. It was still winter at the time. There was much wind, agitated sea, but the walk was still relatively frequented. At the end of the sea walk, there's a big red building next to the sea, making the walk bypassing it, going right, then left, following the sea. This portion was less maintained and more isolated, with dirty ground, lots of trash, and broken benches. Arriving near this section, I noticed a guy a bit behind me, walking at the same speed as me. Being behind, but on my right, I could see him quite easily. He was a small guy, around 30 years old, with a beard, medium long hair, and a hooded blue jacket. I didn't really care for him until I walked on the neglected portion at the end of the sea walk. Walking there, he started to speak me in a weird language. I didn't speak Greek, but I really had the feeling that he didn't speak like the other locals. He spoke in a really fast way. The Greek people were really nice. I first thought that he was friendly, trying to discuss with a stranger. I told him that I didn't speak Greek in English. As he continued to speak in his language, and me insisting on the fact that I just could speak English, He came closer to me, and I really felt that he wasn't as friendly as I thought. After 1 minute of incomprehension, he started to be really too close to me and seemed really pissed off. Strangely, there was absolutely no one around us. I felt the atmosphere was really strange. Abruptly, he took my forearm with his hand and told me really loudly, "Passport, passport." I rejected him with my hand, and he continues to say the same word. He really wasn't any kind of policeman, but really not a hot blood type. I told him really calmly but firmly to move out many times. "Goodbye, mister. Please move." He stayed there, so I moved away like 10 meters, going back the direction I came. He stared at me for a few seconds and moved away too, going in the other direction. He really didn't look in a hurry, just pissed off. I stayed here for 1 minute. Then a family appeared really quickly, walking quietly. They didn't look as if they saw the altercation. Until now, it looked pretty much like a creepy encounter. This is where the story gets more strange for me. The direction the guy took was going left after my location, so I couldn't see the way he took. After 1 minute, I decided to follow his way, wanting to see what he was doing. I took the turn, and I was really surprised to see many people walking normally, but not any trace of the guy that just assaulted me. The walk offers no escape in less than 150 to 200 meters, with the big red building on the left and the sea on the right, before another turn further on. I really had the feeling that the guy vanished. If he had run fast to get out, the people walking wouldn't look so normal, and I didn't see why he would have escaped from me. I didn't call the police or anything. Then I thought about it. When he was talking to me, I really had the feeling that the surroundings were completely empty of people, in an unusual way. But in the instant he vanished, many random people started to appear everywhere, on every side of the walk, as if everything was going back to normal. My imagination made me think that it could be like an encounter from another dimension, or something, but then I thought that it probably could be a phantasma. Even if this encounter was weird, I can't really say for sure that it was a paranormal experience. But it was really odd. I really don't know why the guy was asking me for my passport. I really don't know if he was Greek. This is not a terrifying story. Maybe he just didn't like the foreigners. Maybe he was just a bit mad. But all the atmosphere around the altercation gave me a weird feeling.